Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ICFJ Pamela Howard Forum on Global Crisis Reporting. I am Stella Roque, Director of Community Engagement, and this webinar comes at a dark moment today, as we'll be discussing how to report on a crisis happening in real time. The most significant European war in almost 80 years has begun today. After months of diplomatic wrangling and rising tensions, this morning Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Bombardments have been reported from across the country. Residents in Kiev have been flocking to ATMs and stores to stock up on cash and food. Many have sought to evacuate the country and are now headed to the Polish border. Whether you are in Nigeria, Argentina, India, or any other part of the world, we ask that you as journalists please keep your eyes on Ukraine. We've brought two esteemed and experienced journalists and foreign correspondents in conflict reporting to explain not only why this conflict is important, but how you can better report on the war for your own national audiences. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists, Ostap Yarysh, an international journalist and now broadcast reporter with Voice of America's Ukrainian service, and Tom Mutch, a conflict reporter who has written for the Daily Beast, openDemocracy, and currently the BylineTimes, who has covered conflict in Afghanistan, Armenia, and is currently covering Ukraine. If you have questions during this discussion, we might not be able to get to them today because both these journalists are under pressure to report on the invasion that happened this morning. But yes, they'll be able to answer these questions possibly within the forum group if you post them there later on. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Tom, you're currently based in Kiev. Set the scene for us. What is Kiev like right now?
So it's, no one will deny that this is a bad time for the people of Ukraine, for the people of Kiev. I was up, there's a viewpoint in the city. It's right between the old city and the modern city. There's this big, beautiful hill and you get this amazing, amazing view over the city. And I often have been up there with friends just to it's a really nice place to just stroll around, but you go up there now and you can look and you can see smoke coming from missile impacts in Kiev. This has not happened since the Second World War. It's just absolutely unbelievable. And, you know, it's honestly just heartbreaking to watch. I can't put it any other way.
And what is sort of the air among Ukrainian citizens in Kiev at the moment and what you've felt walking around the city?
So one thing that I've been very impressed by the resilience of the Ukrainian people, because obviously they have been living under the threat. Well, they've been living under the threat of this immediate crisis for the last several months. But remember that there has been a war going on in Ukraine for coming on 8 years now, since Russia invaded Crimea and Russian separatists took control of areas in Donetsk and Luhansk. So people are very, very calm is not quite the right word, but they're very orderly, they're very disciplined. There's no like shouting and screaming and crying in the streets. People are lining up, but they're kind of in a sort of a measured way for, as you said, ATMs to get food. People have been rushing to the bus stations and the train stations, but there's no like big scramble for seats or people fighting amongst each other. And I've spoken to a lot of Ukrainians who said, look, we have been living with war for 8 years. We have known that one day this day might come. Many of us have been emotionally and psychologically preparing for it for a long time. So in that sense, it might be a bit easier to tolerate than if it will just come at once with no warning.
Thank you so much. Ostap, thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad you made it, given all the breaking stories that's happening today. Ostap, you are a Ukrainian reporter with Voice of America. Tell us and all the journalists in our forum, why is covering Ukraine right now particularly important? And why should this be covered from everywhere in the world, regardless of whether you are in Ukraine or not?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Stella. So yeah, we have been working like for the entire night, like our team, and not only our team, this has been like hectic for us, to be honest. It is important because it is not only about Ukraine, and we've heard those statements from both Ukrainian people, officials, and the US officials as well. And we see that this is not only like Eastern Ukraine. I don't know if you guys, if you've seen the map, but like this is the some facilities and cities were shelled that are like within 50 miles to Poland, which is the NATO country, and others. So this might be the beginning of something much bigger than only Ukraine and Russia. And this is about European security, about world order, about democracy. And this is an attack not only on Ukraine, but on something much bigger than that. And that's why it should be of interest, I think, of media, not only in Europe or the United States, but in other regions around the world as well.
Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
So one thing that I think is that, this, one of the reasons this has such worldwide relevance is that, with the kind of, the idea is that we have this kind of imperfect rules-based international order. And that when states have problems with the conduct of neighboring states, the big development that's been helped by international organizations like the United Nations is that these countries resolve their issues diplomatically. Now, I think the biggest tragedy of the Ukraine crisis, along with the suffering of the Ukrainian people, could be the idea that if Russia gets away with enforcing its political and diplomatic aims by military force, that this sets an example, not just for this particular region, but for the world, for countries in the world that want to enforce their will on their neighbors. They might feel, oh, well, Russia got away with it in Ukraine. Why can't we get away with it too? Which is why I think it's relevant. The wider crisis in Ukraine is so relevant to everyone, no matter what region they're covering.
I'll add to that, especially when we talk about dictatorships or authoritarian countries like China or Iran or other places. So yeah, this could set pretext or just great example for them if Russia gets away with that. That they will, they might be unpunished for their actions as well.
Yes. Well, I want to set the stage here to really discuss the concept of foreign correspondence or war reporting, what matters to each of your audiences and how you go about picking the stories to report, a bit of unpacking a day in your life. So Ostap, you are at a breaking news desk right now. What does a day in your life look like reporting on this story to Ukrainians from Washington, D.C.? And what are the most important elements for you? And what does a Ukrainian audience need to know from Washington, D.C.?
To be honest, I'm not sure whether it's still a day or night for me because we've been working like 24/7. Of course, since the Russians launched the attack, and for past weeks, it's been like one endless week without days off or without like breaks. Of course, we had like breaks, but it didn't feel like those things because we are constantly on standby and constantly, especially now, trying to report the things. So our focus, since we are based in Washington, D.C., not in Kiev, not in any other Ukrainian city, we are covering what is the Western response, what is the United States response to what is happening in Ukraine. And I see that there is a lot of interest within the Ukrainian audience, and they're looking at the West, at the United States, and waiting what the response will be. Because Ukraine, of course, people can fight, and Ukrainian army is sufficient enough, and they're capable of fighting the Russian army and the aggressor. But Ukrainian army and people, they need help, and they're looking for this help and awaiting what will, for example, Biden say or other European leaders. So we know that Biden will speak today at 12:30 p.m. Eastern time, and we will be translating and broadcasting his speech live. And I've gotten already thousands, like not thousands, but like dozens and hundreds of commentaries and reactions from our audience that are waiting for his speech and waiting what the reaction will be. So, for example, yesterday, what we did when the Russians launched the attack, we already started like this live blog on our website, and we did a couple of lives, and we went live to our audience and explaining what is the situation, what was the first reactions of the West, what is the West prepared to do, and people are waiting for that.
And Tom, what about you? What does a day in your life look like in Ukraine developing a story for Western audiences? What's the most important elements, and what do you think a Western audience needs to know?
Well, I mean, I'll take you through my day to day, really. It's not a typical day of my life, to be honest, because there's no days that are like this, these days come about very infrequently. So I remember we'd heard like there was a rumor there was going to be an invasion at like 4 a.m. So everyone stayed up till about 4 a.m. Then eventually I was a little bit like, after we got to 4 a.m., nothing had happened. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go to sleep, only to get shaken awake by my colleague at 5:15 being like, it's happening. They're bombing, they're rocketing Boryspil Airport. And so after that, honestly, we just got up. We were going around all day. We were doing filming, we were doing interviews, on one hand, I'm tweeting. On the other hand, I'm doing Instagram lives, just kind of explaining the situation. I'm, communicating with this editor who wants something and this editor who wants something else. And the main thing that we want to try and do, though, is we want to try and give, I think the role of a foreign correspondent should be that your voice is as little present as possible if you can help it, and that you should be telling the stories of the people on the ground themselves who live there, and you're the vessel to tell that story. The story is not, oh, hi, I'm a foreign correspondent, I'm here in the middle of the action, even if that's sometimes what editors want. So I think it's getting that local crucial human element. So for us today, that's been people that have been, when air raid sirens go off, people that have been huddling in metros, people who have fled to the bus and the train stations, trying to get out of Kiev, trying to flee west, people who we know who are stuck in the regions in the east, cities like Mariupol and Kramatorsk, where a large part of Ukrainian forces, it seems they may have been cut off. And it's just talking to them, and it's just trying to work, everything out. And I hope that basically answers the question. We're all a little bit frazzled here without, as he said, without sleep or without
Yeah,
much
you
time.
told me earlier that you hadn't slept for more than 24 hours, staying up all night waiting for this invasion to happen. What do you think, and I'm going to throw this to Ostap, because there's been a lot of reporting on Ukraine, Russia up until this invasion today. What do you think a lot of reporters get or are likely to get wrong in reporting about what's happening in Ukraine? And what would be your chief recommendations to them when reporting on this war, whether it's from home or from the front lines? Ostap?
Right. So I would say a couple of things. So first, I think the very important elements from both sides, our side here in the United States and people who report from Ukraine, is the correct translation of things, because we have seen a lot of mistakes that have been done when the Ukrainian reporters didn't get Biden's remarks correctly. And for example, if you remember, like his speech like a couple of weeks ago, when he said that the attack is very likely to happen, and he added that it's going to be he said that the World War II was a war of necessity. This is going to be the war of choice, and there was like some not accurate inaccurate translation from the Ukrainian side, and Ukrainian media was sharing the news that the United States will choose to participate in this war on the Ukrainian side, something like that, which of course President Biden didn't say. And I saw the reports like also from the Western media when they didn't understand Zelensky's remarks correctly or some other officials' remarks. And I think this is very crucial when it comes to those official statements, because they can be like very important, especially in the way how they are perceived by the audience. Uh, the second thing that I would like to add, I was speaking to my friends in Ukraine, trying to understand what is their perception, how they see the situation, especially talking to the Western media. And they say that many American media or journalists who come to Ukraine, they wanted to, before the attack, of course, they wanted to get some like sensational breaking news or see crying people or those devastated homes or people begging on the streets. Like they wanted some drama, they wanted some like this heartbreaking story. But what they saw, that the Ukrainian people were prepared for the attack. They were there was no panic before it, and that they were kind of disappointed. And people in Ukraine were a bit frustrated, and they said, treat us as human beings and not just a story material. And I perfectly understand that. And I realize why the people felt that way. So probably treating people as human beings, not as a story material, I think that would be my advice.
Thank you. Tom, do you have anything to add to that, having seen a lot of English language reporting around this crisis before the invasion?
I mean, yeah, I think what he said about like seeing people as, trying to get avoid the sensational stories is kind of true. I remember I had one colleague, for instance, be like, we were in the same city, just being like, and we were thinking of like stories to do and people to interview and stuff. And he's like, right, I need to get footage of the military fighting by the end of the day because that's what my editors want. And I'm like, well, this is something a bit sensational. It's not just something we can just be organized for you when there are like genuinely important stories to tell here about people who have been living with this conflict for sort of 8 years. I can't really speak to the translation. I know a little Russian and I'm sorry to say very, very little Ukrainian, although I do remember the problem with Zelensky's remarks being misinterpreted. You know, he'd said something in jest and the translators hadn't picked it up that it was in jest and reported it as if it was serious. I also think there's a lot that people can kind of get wrong in terms of with Ukraine specifically about wanting to be objective about the situation. I think we do have to be quite clear here that I think Biden was right when he talks about that this is a war of choice, and that I do think we have to, in this case, point out aggression, that it is a war of a strong nation against a weaker nation, trying to push them around, trying to bully them. And whether you can go and say that the Russians have some kind of point about their legitimate security interests because of NATO expansion or whatever, there is absolutely nothing that Ukraine has done to have ever justified what is going on and what will happen now. I think it's important in cases like these to show that while you can understand the perspective of the aggressor side, which is in this case Russia, you do point out that they are the aggressor in this situation, and that, you know, a lot of what they were saying about Ukraine and the sort of imminent genocide in Donbass they were talking about, which thankfully I don't think many people ended up buying, that this is mostly lies and nonsense.
I would add one thing, just came up to my mind. I think what is also very important is a vocabulary that reporters and media are using. For example, this is not Ukraine crisis. This is Russia's war against Ukraine. Or they're not like separatists in Donbass. Those are Russian forces that have been stationed there for 8 years. And like when I see reports that MH17 was shot by separatists, this is not true. It was shot by the Russian citizens and by the Russian command. So important to use right vocabulary. I know there are some vocabularies prepared by the Ukrainian NGOs, media NGOs who work with the reporters. So that is important as well for the international media when they cover the war, to remember to use correct terms and correct vocabulary.
Thank you for that, Ostap. Now, Tom, you've specifically done a good deal of reporting from conflict zones for the past couple of years in your career. For reporters who want to take on frontline reporting in particular, especially those in Ukraine right now, those foreign reporters who are there, what are key steps, especially in terms of personal security, that you'd advise them to take before embarking to the front lines?
Okay, so I want to be careful about what I say with regarding the front lines of Ukraine right now, because honestly, I don't think we really know where the front lines are. We don't know where they will be in 24 hours. We have no idea how dangerous they will be, or if there will be some, there could be some places that are where it's relatively calm and it's safe to go, but that could change literally overnight. We simply don't know enough about these front lines. So I really, really don't want to be sitting here being like, oh, as long as you follow these steps, you'll be safe going to the Ukrainian front lines. I really, really cannot guarantee that. I mean, look, one is the first, you've got to make sure you're like mentally and sort of physically prepared for it. You know, the first time a rocket or an explosion or a bullet lands near you, you will have an emotional reaction that you cannot necessarily predict. Yeah, I actually just saw a message come up. Yes, I do have hostile environment training. I actually did my first war zone without having done it, and I wouldn't recommend anyone do that. I think it's a very important thing, just so that you know, like kind of basic first aid, kind of basic, vehicle and dwelling safety and stuff like that. It is important to do, and it is possible. I know they can be slightly pricey, but it is often possible to get scholarships or bursaries, or if you work for a reasonably well-funded like news organization, like a national broadcaster, I think it's something to insist on having. Yeah, we do have personal protective equipment here. It's always good to carry a helmet and to carry a flak jacket and things like that. And I also it's a tired line, but it's true, is that no story is worth losing life or limb over. Well, maybe if it's an absolutely unbelievable story, like the story of a terrible war crime, and you're the only person who can tell it, and no one else can. But I really don't think it's worth taking those risks just to get, say, frontline footage, of tanks and stuff like that. I really don't think that that's really worth putting your life at risk for.
I would add one thing. I would very much agree with Tom. I know one journalist is my friend Nolan Patterson. He works in Ukraine, and he's war correspondent, and he used to be the United States military, and he's been in Afghanistan, Iraq, covering the war. And one thing that he always says that no story is worth dying or taking the risk of dying. So I think that's the important thing to keep in mind too.
Thank you both. And Ostap, you're currently working in a pretty high pressure daily newsroom right now, covering what US officials are saying and doing in response to Russia, keeping an eye on events unfolding from the Russian government side and from Europe. There's a lot of conflicting rhetoric, especially here in the United States, where this crisis is being politicized nationally. What have you seen in terms of discourse shaping and agenda setting that you think does not assist in reporting about Ukraine? And how can journalists avoid the pitfall of towing political agendas?
Right. So, well, first, I think that, while we are under high pressure, but of course, Tom and others who are in Ukraine, it's like incomparable, of course. We're covering here. It's likely, it just, I think it's more of psychological pressure on us, and we're not in immediate physical danger. But yeah, when it comes to the covering the White House or the Congress or other the United Nations, or how they respond to the war and to the Russia's action. So what I have seen that it is indeed being politicized, especially from the extreme right and extreme left wings of the American political field. And I've seen a lot of commentaries from bloggers or even media, both from the right and from the left. They have been saying that before the war actually started, they have been saying that that this is, I mean, nothing will happen. Those are only Biden's or the administration's words, and he's only fueling the whole situation. The United States is instigating the war or provoking Russia. So and it was just, and sometimes they were like sharing some blatant misinformation or disinformation that we have seen on Russian TV. For example, those examples you can see on Tucker Carlson's show when he basically is repeating the Kremlin's propaganda, and then Kremlin state TV, they use his pieces on their shows. And so I have seen a lot of disinfo like on both sides again, and it was interesting to see how extreme right and extreme left, while they're supposed to be on the opposite sides, like on the very opposite sides. But when it comes to something like the war in Ukraine, surprisingly, I have seen some very similar messages that that the United States is provoking Russia, that Ukraine isn't a democracy, or why should we support Ukraine, or like we should give Russia what it wants and let it go. Yeah, so I think it is important also to filter your sources and like look at what do you see, what do you consume when it comes to the media coverage and watching and reading the media. So I think it is important because like those things, like Tucker Carlson, he has like his viewership. I mean, it's millions of people, right? And it's not only him or other like bloggers or that we saw. So like it is important also to keep this in mind and realize that there might be some manipulations and disinformation even here. I'm not sure if they're paid or if they genuinely believe that, but they have been spreading those lies and this sort of information, and that's another thing that we have to think about as well.
Thank you, Ostap. Tom, you've written some really fantastic long form pieces covering conflict, and your most recent pieces from Ukraine really provide both a human face to what's happening on the ground. And now with the invasion, I know you're probably going to be out and about talking to many different people. How do you manage to find your sources? And maybe sort of taking a bit from an audience question, when you're talking to different people to put together a story, how do you avoid potentially the pitfall of disinformation?
Okay, so now my strategy is often like, I know a lot of journalists use social media as their main strategy. That really isn't mine in order to get sources. Genuinely, talking to people in person on the street, like completely regular people, is the way that I get the vast majority of my stories. Is literally just I talk to people and I say, look, what is on your mind? What would you like to, you're in this country, what's going on that you'd like to hear more about, or you'd like to know more about? And often they will say, oh, well, this is really winding me up, there's this scandal going on, oh, I know this person who you could talk to, and you'll always be blown away by like who knows who in particular cases. I'll give you one of my examples that I really enjoyed. This was when I was covering the war in Armenia. I was literally just in a bar and I saw the bartender had his arm in a sling, and I was like, hey mate, what happened to your arm? And he was like, oh, I just got back from the front line in Nagorno-Karabakh, I got shot. I was like, that's horrible, I'm sorry. He's like, don't worry about it, it's the third time I've been shot. And I was like, wow. Anyway, it turned out this guy was Syrian. He'd fought in the Syrian civil war, ended up fleeing and had gone to Armenia. And so I ended up doing this very, very long, one of the longest form pieces for New Lines magazines about a group of Syrian Armenians who had fought in Syria and had formed a brigade to fight with Armenia against Azerbaijan. So literally, I think that is genuinely the way that I do it. Is I'm just a talkative person, and I like talking to whoever I meet, really, and that's how I get my stories.
Thank you, Tom. And Ostap, when dealing with fast-paced breaking news and with what one of our audience members said, like scant time to really verify information, how does your team at VOA go about identifying disinformation? What kind of disinformation have you seen concerning this war? And what has been your response as journalists when you see it?
Absolutely. Like I'm just like, on Twitter and like Messenger, and I have friends in Ukraine, those who work in on the Chernobyl nuclear plant, and they are sending me the videos that they're like tanks right now. And like when it comes to the verifying, what I know, like when I trust people who are on the ground and like people that I know personally, and when they tell me something, like I ask them, okay, listen, like, is this like is this what you see, or you think that that's what you see, right? I mean, it's super important to double check info, and I tell this to Ukrainian people, say this to Ukrainian people, that please don't share things that you are not 100% sure or you're not witnessing right now. So for example, now he sent me the video, right, from his office, and like with the tanks, and I'm like, okay, like whose tanks are this? He said like those are not Ukrainian tanks, because Ukrainian tanks, like they look differently, right? And he says like I cannot verify whether there are like active fightings or what, but this is what I see from my office window, right? So this is important. But like verifying misinformation, like we were doing lives yesterday, right? I did them at like 3 a.m., 1 a.m., and they were live feeds, and I could read the commentaries on Facebook, on YouTube under our live. And I told people, please, if you have any info, you can share this with us, or like if you have any questions, you can ask them. And there were like this surge of I don't, maybe they were bots or maybe they were provocateurs, they're writing that airport in Zhytomyr is in flames, everything is burning, chaos in the city. And of course it looks and sounds very sensational and very like breaking news, right? But nothing happened in Zhytomyr, in fact, right? It's important to see when you see something super that shocks you, very shocking, to double check. And even if it's if you have the video, or if you see these the sources reporting, like, we don't post this immediately, we need to verify, or we wait for the official confirmation, or we wait for other things. Like yesterday there were reports of Russian jets that were shot down by the Ukrainian forces. Like, we saw the videos and the images on Twitter, on Facebook, and people were talking about that, posting, but we didn't say anything about this until there was an official confirmation. Or about the attack on some like airports in the Western Ukraine. We also didn't report about that when we until we had the official confirmation, and until we had several videos and photos from people on the ground that we know, and those photos they took by themselves. So it is super important to filter what you see, and not to repost, or not to voice these things, because this is not only physical war, this is also war of information. And we know that the Russians, they were using those tactics like for a long time, and many times in the past, along with military activities. They were spreading disinfo to spread the panic, or to report that the Ukrainian forces are just laying down the arms, or that the Ukrainian forces are losing and giving up the land. So it is very important to stay as calm as possible, and not to spread something that is not proven, or that you're not 100% sure. That's what we have been doing here at BUA.
Thank you, Ostap. Now, I promised both of you I would let you go in half an hour, because I know the news is hot right now and you guys are covering this war. So just a final wrap-up question to both
Sure.
of you. We can start with Tom and then go to Ostap. What's your takeaway message to the journalists in this forum, whether they're just starting out their careers in foreign correspondence, or they're beginning to cover this war in Ukraine, Russia? What would you have them know? So Tom, starting with you.
A little bit about what I was saying about like how I like to go and get my stories. I do think that there's the people in the age of social media and open source intelligence. I don't work in a newsroom, so like my job is very different. I don't work in a newsroom, so that's not really my job. But I still like the idea of kind of being able to be on the ground, where the place is, going to the places, seeing the people. And I think if you want to get the first thing I say to anybody who says, oh, I want to do like foreign reporting, but I don't know where to start. Do I apply for a job at like, I don't know, the Times or whatever? I'm like, no. What you do is you go out there and you go there and you stay there and you get the story. However, and then you can, then you can kind of prove your chops that way. But it's like, yeah, but at the same time, don't take enormous and extraordinary risks to get that story either. We kind of learn about where you're, because the more you do this, the more you kind of learn about yourself. You learn where your comfort levels are. You learn where your what your kind of emotional resilience and capability to deal with stress and trauma is, and that's quite important as well. But it is an amazing and rewarding career, even if it is sometimes, like it is today, it can be extremely, extremely taxing. And I can only just think also, it's not like, you know, it must be much worse for my Ukrainian colleagues who are here, because this is their homeland, and what happens here will affect their lives and their families' lives. And I'll end on that note. Thank you.
Thank you. Ostap?
Right. What I would say that talk to people, like regular people on the ground. Like whenever you travel to other countries that are peaceful, and you want to do this story, like not don't think that it's necessarily that you should necessarily focus on politics from the newsroom. I think what is much more important is talking to people, listening to their stories, understanding them, because that's the way you understand. That's the best way to understand the country and understand what it is about. Like for me, journalism, although I do like politics coverage a lot, But for me personally, the most important part of journalism is that it is for people and about people. I remember when the pandemic started last year, the New York Times did this, the front page, when it was like May 2020, when we had first 100,000 deaths from COVID, and the New York Times did this front page with names of the people and short, like, couple of words, like John Smith was a longtime firefighter, or Elizabeth Parker, she loved the ocean, or I don't Becky Robbins, she was grandma who loved her grandchildren. And this was like just a couple of words, but this was so powerful, like to just showing to giving these statistics, the numbers, human faces, and those like giving human faces to this story, to the broader context. I think that's what we should be focused on when we go to other countries, when we report from other countries, or from your home countries to the external world, to the English audience. Like, just go to people, talk to people, and that's the way, I mean, that's how you can connect and relate to them. Because when others read these stories, and when they see that, okay, this is like the problem has the human face, and this is this mother, and she tells this story, it's much easier and much, I think, I'll not say the word better, like it's much easier to relate to the story, and also like it's much easier to tell the story from your point, from your perspective. That would be my advice.
Thank you both so much. Now, I know you're both covering this as this is breaking news, so you're more than welcome to leave the webinar. And I just want to thank you both for joining us on our forum. If you're an audience member in this Zoom webinar today, please, Ostap and Tom will both be in the digital group of the forum. So we encourage you, if you have any questions, to please post them there, and they will get to it when they can. Thank you again to both. I wish you good luck covering this war, and I hope that you, Tom, in Ukraine, please stay safe.
I'll do my best.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, people who are listening to us.
Yes,
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye. And I just want to remind everyone here, if you would like to join the forum on Facebook, please search for the ICFJ Pamela Howard Forum on Global Crisis Reporting and request to join the group. If you're not on Facebook, you can also subscribe to our newsletters, where you can get updates on our webinars on www.icfj.org. ICFJ has also launched a news business hub called Elevate, focused on helping C-level journalists who are running small and medium-sized media outlets to develop their business skills so that their newsrooms can become sustainable and grow. Please go on our website to get more information about that. And finally, a recap of this webinar, in addition to tip sheets and other resources for journalists, will be available on ijnat.org. Thank you again, and I hope I'll see you all on the forum. Goodbye and good luck.